Healthy love survives boundaries. It survives honesty. It survives seasons where you aren't producing. Healthy love doesn't disappear the first time you disappoint someone. And if a relationship only exists because you constantly rescue it, perhaps it isn't love that has been holding it together. Perhaps it's your labor that has been holding it together. And that's a hard one to hear. Living Content Era 2 is for the person who's already on the journey and is ready to go even deeper. It's for the deeply reflective human who knows that the gap between external success and internal alignment is real and is no longer willing to paper over it. It's for the woman who holds a lot in her home and her career and her community and is starting to ask harder questions about who is she beneath everything she carries. It's for anyone who is excellent in every room and quietly unsettled on the drive home. It's for anyone who has done enough living to know that who you are on the inside shapes everything that happens on the outside, and who wants to talk about it honestly, without performance and without pretending. Hello sis and the brother in the room. Hello family. Welcome to Living Content Podcast. This is a space where we slow down enough to hear ourselves again. A space where we are not trying to become someone else, but to remember who we have always been beneath the noise, beneath the survival, beneath the performance, right? Today I want to talk about something that has been shaping many of our relationships, and for mine as well. Something that often disguises itself as love, as loyalty, as generosity, as kindness. I think many of us do know this one very well, and it's not necessarily one that is specific to a certain kind of people, but underneath it, there can be a different longing altogether. I want us to explore the difference between being needed and being loved, because the two are not the same. And many of us have spent years mistaking one for the other. I want to begin with a question. Let's say if you stopped solving everyone's problem tomorrow, who would you call? Who would you still call? If you stopped being the one who always remembers birthdays, always checks in, always volunteers, always carries, and always fixes, without all of that, would you still believe you deserve a seat at the table? Or would there be a quiet whisper at the back of your mind that says, what if they don't need me anymore? It is such an uncomfortable question because many of us have never allowed ourselves to ask it. For a long time, I believed that being dependable was simply part of my personality. I had wrapped around my identity around being reliable, being dependable, and being needed. And it is part of my personality. I genuinely care. I like contributing. I like making things better. But over time, I realized that some of my generosity wasn't coming from freedom. It was coming from fear. The fear that if I wasn't useful, I might become forgettable. I might stop being needed. And given that my identity was wrapped around being needed, then who am I if I'm no longer needed? That was the question that I was sitting with. Being generous didn't come from a place of freedom, but because of the fear that was holding, that if I wasn't that, then who am I if I wasn't needed anymore? I don't think we wake up one morning and decide that our worth will depend on how useful we are. I think we learn it. Sometimes very early on, we learn how to be the dependable one. And I think this one is very much common with the elder daughter. And you'll hear me talk about eldest daughter quite too often, but because simply that is the role I hold myself personally. But if you see yourself through these episodes and you recognize certain elements of what I talk about as your lived experience, it does not also invalidate you being able to take the lessons and seeing how do you use what I've shared here for yourself, right? So perhaps you are an elder daughter, the responsible child, the peacemaker, the one who matured very quickly because life required it. Perhaps your family praised you for never asking for much, for helping, for always being the one who sacrifices themselves, for being so matured that, and you'll find this as well, especially when it comes to maturity, that you gravitate towards friendships with older peers. People are not necessarily your age mates, but people who are grown-ups, who are matured and regarded as wiser, because your age mates, is a lot with your age mate that you don't resonate with. It's because you have been the one in the kitchen who is surrounded by older conversations, right? You grew up in that space where you were a participant of older conversations, or conversations that were not for your age group, right? You find yourself being praised for being so matured, or maybe you learned that love arrives most consistently after being useful. Maybe you were noticed most often when you performed, when you achieved. And I think this one, most of us actually can resonate with that. When you carried more load than you needed to carry, when you held everything together, when you held everyone together. So usefulness slowly became your language of belonging. That's how you found your belonging, by being useful without even noticing it. You stopped asking, who am I? And started asking, what do people need from me? I spoke about this in one of the podcast episodes that I shared. It might have been the previous one. You stopped asking yourself, who am I? You tend to operate from a place of what is needed from me. And those are two different questions. One thing I've been learning is that not all giving is the same. Sometimes we give because our hearts are full, and that's a different place to give from. Other times we give because we are afraid that saying no will disappoint people. And we even tend to lie. Instead of outrightly saying no, we'd lie and say, I am broke, I don't have money. But in actual truth, you might hold the funds that they want, they are asking for. But because there's no better way of actually landing the message, it's much more easier to go quiet or to repeatedly say, I don't have money. And guess what? They'll keep on trying if you never really articulate what is the truth. You know, sometimes saying no is one thing that we are afraid to say because it will disappoint people. And sometimes we're afraid that resting will make us appear lazy, afraid that boundaries will cost us relationships, afraid that if we stop carrying everyone, they will stop choosing us, they will stop being our friends. The difficult part is that the outside looks identical. Both people are helping, both people are serving, both people are showing up, but internally, one is giving from abundance and the other is giving from anxiety, from fear. And you know what? Only you know which one you're living. Here's a strange thing. Being needed can feel incredibly secure. It can feel incredibly secure because think about it. If people need you, they'll constantly call you. They'll constantly have you as their first or plan B option, right? To call and reach out to. If everyone depends on me, then surely they'll keep me close. If I become indispensable, I can't be abandoned. But that's a heavy way to earn connection because now your relationship depends on your performance, on what you can do for it, not just your presence. You become valuable because you do. You become valuable because you give. You become valuable because you empty yourself, not because you are who you are, not because you simply just are. And that's exhausting because life changes, people grow, children become adults, projects end, and you know this very well. People that you befriended because of close proximity. And if you've reached a point of adulthood in your life, you realize that most of the friendships that you had kept in your life, in your childhood, for example, in varsity, some of them were easier to maintain because proximity. You were all meeting at the same place in the most common place, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever the case may be. So that made it easy for you guys to nurture a relationship. But what happens when children become adults? When now you move from a phase of being a child to adulthood, people grow, you evolve, and same as with work, projects end, jobs changes, parents recover, friends find support elsewhere. What happens then when all of those dynamics, all of those inevitable experiences of life happen? If your identity depends on being needed, every season of change will feel like a rejection. When people evolve, when people transition into new roles in their lives, be it parenthood, be it at work, whatever case may be, when they transition, then it will feel like rejection. So what is it exactly that you're not looking into that you're hoping to find outside by being needed? Because the very same thing with life evolving like this, it will now confront you because you've been avoiding looking closely into it. So now you'll be left confronted with the very same thing that you've been constantly doing to avoid sitting with. I want to say love doesn't keep score. Real love is surprisingly ordinary. It allows you to be tired. It lets you arrive without having something to offer. It doesn't require you to constantly improve your usefulness. Real love says you don't have to earn your place here. You can contribute, you can serve, you can lead, but none of those things become the price of belonging. I think many of us are fluent in giving, but we are still learning how to receive compliments, how to receive help, how to receive care, how to receive grace, and how to receive rest, how to just rest. Sometimes receiving feels harder than giving because giving allows us to stay in control, but receiving requires us to trust and to be okay to just receive. And it's not to say you should abandon the work required in a relationship, because it is true what they say, that any relationship, it grows because of your willingness to be inconvenienced. It grows because of your willingness to be willing to participate in nurturing and growing the relationship. And I would even say equally so, or to some extent, seasons differ. There are seasons where, just as with the romantic relationships, there are seasons where your friendship might require 80% from you. There are seasons where you can only give 20%. There are seasons where there is no capacity at all. But being able to communicate, being able to nurture it, even when seasons are changing, there is a responsibility still that lies with you when it comes to nurturing and building relationships. So it's not necessarily to say that abandon the work required, but it's just to say that allow yourself a balanced view of being able to give and receive as well. It's very hard for people who have been constantly giving to receive. And you've tend to find that even in receiving, there's almost the fear of, am I supposed to give that in return? Am I supposed to equalize what I have received? And from that place, then you're not necessarily building a relationship. You're merely just reciprocating without intentionally building the relationship. Now I digress to talk about relationship, but it's quite important that we recognize that when we bring a part of us everywhere we go, there's no way that you can say that I bring a part of myself in my friendships, at work, in my marriage, in how I raise my kids. There will always be an underlying thread that goes across every aspect of your life. Yes, how you relate to these different aspects of your life and how you show up for them might differ, but the core beliefs that you still hold about yourself, about who you are, still bleeds or still comes across or still become the water that nurtures or that fertilizes the relationship or that aspect of your life. I've noticed this pattern in different seasons of my life, in friendships, in family, at work. There has been a moment where I automatically stepped forward because I assumed everything would fall apart if I didn't. And sometimes it wasn't even true. Sometimes people were perfectly capable. And I'm learning this now with my siblings growing, that I still hold the same assumptions about them that I did when they were younger. And I still refer to them as little, whereas they are now grown-ups. Yes, they are younger than me, but they're not necessarily little anymore. And they're very much capable of thinking for themselves, of thinking on their own. And I still have this protective, I want to carry the pain as much as right now I find myself pulling back to actually just know and believe that they are capable, I still spend time thinking that, oh man, that could have been approached differently. When those moments do come, I remind myself that you are not the memo. You are not the memo to this life. Their life is meant to unfold the way it is. And if you're constantly trying to rewrite the script, you're essentially imposing yourself to the situation. You're essentially thinking that the way life unfolds for you is how it ought to for everyone else. And I think Oprah once said this, that sometimes you need to step away to let God be God in people's lives. And that's one hard thing that I've had to learn, to actually let God be God in people's lives. And as much as you think that, oh my goodness, they are headed towards the wrong path, the very same path that you and I, that all of us tend to go towards when someone who's watching this movie of our lives would say, don't go there, would be screaming saying, don't go there. It's sometimes one of the building blocks that builds a character that helps you later on hold or embody a much larger and bigger role in your life, a level of growth in your life that required that season of character building. In any case, let me not digress yet again. And so that has been where I have been learning quite a lot as well from my own personal relationships. I realized that people are perfectly capable. But because I had quietly convinced myself that caring was my role, stepping back felt irresponsible. My goodness, stepping back felt irresponsible, like things will fall apart, until I realized that carrying everything wasn't making me more loving. It was making me exhausted, and sometimes it was preventing other people from growing into their own. That was a difficult lesson, because overfunctioning doesn't just cost us. It can unintentionally rob others of responsibility. And there is so much rich lessons found in responsibility that no book can ever teach you. No one can ever even tell you and teach you about, but you experience in assuming the responsibility of your life and experiencing what it means that it can teach you. A lot of lessons can come from that. I don't think I've shared much about my faith journey in terms of where it comes from, how it has been evolved, and where it is right now. But to speak about where it is right now, I find myself, I think in the past 2 years now, even with the close friends of mine, I think they know this very clearly. I've been reading a lot and learning a lot from the Bible, right? And one of the stories I often return to, and I find it every day on the daily Bible app, it comes so often on the plans that I do read. And that story is of Martha and Mary. Martha was busy preparing, serving, making sure everything was in order. And Mary, on the other side, simply sat at Jesus' feet. Then Martha became frustrated. She asked why was she carrying the load alone. And I understand Martha. Many of us understand Martha. But what struck me is that Jesus didn't rebuke the service. He gently reminded Martha that her value wasn't found in endless doing. Her presence mattered too. Sometimes we become so committed to serving that we forget how to simply be. And maybe that is what God has been inviting us into all along. And I mean, not less generosity, but generosity that flows from love, not from fear, that if I stop doing, of what value do I then bring to the table? Of what value do I then bring to this relationship? Of what value do I then bring in my life, in my existence? Because I think it feels like to exist comes with a burden of constantly doing. So what does healthy love look like? Healthy love allows mutuality. Sometimes you carry me, sometimes I carry you. Sometimes neither of us has much to give, and we stay anyway. Healthy love survives boundaries. It survives honesty. It survives seasons where you aren't producing. Healthy love doesn't disappear the first time you disappoint someone. And if a relationship only exists because you constantly rescue it, Perhaps it isn't love that has been holding it together. Perhaps it's your labor that has been holding it together. And that's a hard one to hear. So, questions worth sitting with from this episode, and that I invite you to find the time to sit with yourself. And as always, as I always say, I will also be sharing this on Saturday mornings for Sacred Solitudes on my Substack. As always, I don't want to end with answers. I want to leave you with questions. 1, where in your life have you confused being needed with being loved? And 2, who are you trying to remain indispensable to? And 3, what would happen if you stopped proving your worth for just 1 week? And then 4, can you allow someone else to help? And then 5, can you disappoint someone without believing you've become a disappointment? And then lastly, can you imagine being deeply loved even on the days when you have nothing to offer? I hope this episode reminds you of something gentle. You are allowed to contribute without carrying everyone. And maybe these would sound repetitive, but let me say them nonetheless. You are allowed to contribute without carrying everyone. You are allowed to serve without disappearing. You are allowed to rest without earning it first. You are allowed to be loved before you can become useful. Maybe that is what healing slowly teaches us, that our worth has never been hiding inside our usefulness. It has always been there all along, right? It has been there all along. Our worth has been there all along, unchanging, waiting for us to believe it. Waiting for us to believe it. Thank you for spending time with me today. If today's conversation stayed with you, I would love for you to continue reflecting on it. I've included a few journaling prompts on the episode. Do sit with that. And again, I would love to hear from you and how you are receiving these podcast episodes. I'm also doing a little bit of a thing. I want to know from you directly. What offering would you find very useful and very meaningful in this season of a life? Would a journal with journaling prompts be something that works for you? Or will affirmation cards with reflection questions be something useful for you? Or would a digital offering be something useful for you? So let me know. I am building something that can stay with you long after these episodes end, so that you can actually come back to more often and you have access to freely. So until next time, continue living deeply, continue living intentionally, continue becoming, and don't find yourself living at the margins of your life. You deserve to live at the center of your life. From my heart to yours, I'll see you in the next episode. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode. I really do appreciate you for being here. Please remember to share your love openly here by subscribing, sharing these episodes, and also just adding your feedback on the reviews. So this podcast can also be easily found by those in similar journeys and needing the message here. I would love to hear how the podcast is helping you. So do share that too with me, and be sure to check the podcast out on Instagram. Keep well. Chat to you soon.